Hello YouTube, it's Lawrence again. Had another little sleep earlier, so here I am with part 7. I'm in my night robe and it's 5 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning. Right, now where were we in the last instalment? My father, who went downhill very rapidly. He was court-martialed. He was actually held in prison cells on the RAF base. When somebody is in the RAF and they commit a crime, it is the RAF who deal with them as opposed to the civilian police, even though of course the civilian police can become involved. The RAF deals with any type of crime or misdemeanor on their own turf, and using their own rules. Even though of course they still have to abide by the laws of the land. What happened is really quite interesting, what happened next, because my mother's brother, my uncle, was a wing commander in the RAF. Now he was stationed up in Scotland. He wasn't on the same base, but obviously it caused him a deal of embarrassment, because his brother-in-law had committed a serious crime. Now, my uncle, my mother's brother, the wing commander, he came to RAF Wittering to see my mother, and he said that he would do everything he could to help my father get out of the mess that he was in. That he would have a word with the top brass, as it were, and he would attempt to try and save his career, even though he said there was no chance that he would be able to remain a military police officer. But I think at that time my mother's brother, my uncle, was concerned, deeply concerned about what would become of my mother and me. And as he said at the time, he wasn't doing it for him, my father, he was doing it for myself and my mother, so that at least we could continue to live on the RAF base and still have a roof over our head. So he played, if you like, the Good Samaritan at that particular time, and he pulled the right levers, as it were, and when it came to the court hearing, it was my uncle who stood up and spoke in defence of my father, and it was said that it was completely out of character, that he did have a problem with gambling, that all the money would be paid back, and so on and so forth. You can only begin to even You can't imagine the turmoil my mother must have been in the embarrassment, the gossiping. There were friends. She did have friends who didn't speak to her again because of the bad association. And my father promised that he would never do anything like this again, blah-de-blah-de-blah, that he was very sorry for what had happened, that he was going to get help. And they were merciful. He was told that he'd be stripped of his current status in the RAF, that he would no longer be a police officer, but they decided to keep him on. And he was given a hefty fine, as well as having to pay all of the money back. Quite incredibly, and when you really think about it, it is a miracle. They did keep him in the forces. Time does fly when you're doing this. Well, I've only got 10 minutes, so my father was then forced to go into some kind of counselling, which he did, and he then had to well, he couldn't choose another career in the RAF. They chose it for him, and that was of bar steward, which is something of a lowly career, a very lowly career compared to that of a military police officer. But it was either that or he was out on his ear, so he had no choice. He was working behind the bar. I think it was in the not in the officers' mess, but certainly in the I suppose it was a kind of RAF nightclub. I don't know what they called it now, but and he did, you know, functions and for banquets and dinner, dance evenings, that type of thing. He was a barman. I mean, they still trusted him enough to work with money because he was working with money behind the bar. I think he was closely supervised, but it must have been horrendous for my mother. But unfortunately, it wasn't the end of the problems, and I'll talk about what happened next in my next video. Thank you for listening. Good night.